Your Super Bowl champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Um, can't say I didn't see this one coming. I've been on them all year. I thought they were really, really good. Now, they did have issues that actually I think did crop up a few times, especially later in the year. And I did think they were going to lose the NFC Championship game, I will say. But other than that, I was on them really strong in the Super Bowl and all the other games throughout the whole tail end of the year. So not gonna pat myself in the back too much, but and 29-19-1 overall on bets with them. So the record speaks for itself in regards to that. Position by position though, offensively, Bucks have some really important decisions to make heading into the offseason because they're in a situation much like every other team where they have to choose the right players who are the actual causes of their success and keep them in positions to succeed going forward, which isn't a guarantee, especially on this team. I mean, listen, once we get to the receivers, they already probably made a mistake. So, quarterback first, Tom Brady obviously still has it. Age not really an issue with any of these guys at this point. It seems like, especially arm and mentally, and mental wise, which is by far the most important part. And so while he's completely immobile, he has been for 10, 15 years. So who cares, right? But yeah, next year, not worried about him falling off even a little bit. Even if he does get a little bit of a noodle arm, while that could be a problem in that offense, I suspect that he and Bruce Arians are smart enough to adjust to that. And you're set there, so I don't want to talk about that too much. Running back wise, there's one spot so you gotta be careful. So Ronald Jones, clearly best running back in this team, not close. Now, is he a great running back? Is he one of the guys who matters in the NFL? No, but he does at least do things, especially in terms of explosive runs, that not a ton of other running backs can do, and definitely no one else on this roster. So while he does have injury issues and there's been some fumble pass protection things, I know, but going forward, I would suspect that he will be their starting running back, and he should be, unless they get lucky with some late round pick. Leonard Fournette, though, do not pay him. Listen, I have two Leonard Fournette jerseys. I have to highlight this every time. I think he's really cool, and the concept of him is really cool, but he's not a good NFL player. He's not even close, really. And despite his one highlight in the playoff, that spin move, which, hey, that was fucking sick, he's still really bad, and he actively costs your team yards and by extension points every time he's on the field. So should they pay him? Absolutely not. Now, they do have a depth issue because Keyshawn Vaughn, the rookie, was horrible as well. He didn't show me anything that made me even consider him as part of their future. Not even talking about the fumbling problems he had. Just as an actual runner when he had the ball was not good. Didn't do really anything that impressive. So they do need help at running back for sure, but they at least have someone competent on their roster in Ronald Jones. At receiver, though, most interesting, I think, position group on this team, because you have some guys at the top who are not as good or nearly as good as a lot of people think they are. Some guys down further who are a whole lot better than people think they are, and the money situation is going to be really interesting with how they do this. What I was referencing earlier is they franchised Chris Godwin, and he's not going to be worth that. Now, is he a good receiver? Yes, but he still doesn't actually separate very well on his own. He's okay, but he does benefit tremendously from being a slot receiver in Bruce Arians' offense, as we've seen through Bruce Arians' whole career. And while Chris Godwin does have it, maybe he's the best receiver after the catch in the NFL. So he has an elite skill, and he is a elite receiver, depending on how you want to classify that, in terms of top 15 or whatever. But is he a top 5-10 guy? Not even really that close, because he doesn't actually consistently generate his own stuff. Like a lot of things he would do, any other receiver would do in his spot, minus, again, his after the catch ability, which I don't want to rule out. But the problem with that, like I said, with the franchise tag and the money figures you're getting to, he's not worth it over a replacement receiver. Mike Evans actually is fairly similar, whereas the actual skill that makes him special, being the contested catch type stuff, is different. Now, Mike Evans is better in terms of the down to down getting open, and Mike Evans also has the unique trait of killing bad press corners. I mean, destroying them, and that's really useful because the NFL does still employ a lot of those guys. But same thing where going forward, I like him and everything, but they do got to be careful about depending too much on those two, because the real reason for their success is these other guys. It's Antonio Brown, who by far the best receiver on this team, not close, who's still got it, still really good at this age. Is he going to come back? I would assume so, unless he has some legal trouble or something like that, which I don't want to talk about too much. I don't know the guy or anything about him, but Antonio Brown's really good, and if it's all good, they should bring it back for sure. Tyler Johnson, also really good as a rookie. They absolutely hit on that pick. I'm more than comfortable saying he's going to be a quality NFL receiver for a really long time. He legitimately creates separation. He finds space pretty well against zone coverage. He actually has shown in the NFL some after the catch ability, and I was really impressed with him. And no, not as a product. He's not a product of Tom Brady the way that even a Chris Godwin is. So really like Tyler Johnson. Scotty Miller too. Actually a valuable player. Now he is fits a little bit more into his speed. Really accentuates the strengths of his game in that offense. But he's actually good. He can do some things against man coverage. He's not an idiot against zone coverage. Like he's a value receiver. And I want to mention too. Justin Watson, who was hurt for their whole playoff run a lot of the year. And he's not great, but he's one of these fringe guys that on another team, if he was your third receiver, I'm not going to hate your offense. I'm not going to love it, but they have a lot of really quality depth. And I am just worried with, the payment to these guys at the top that they're going to lose that. And they're going to realize real quick that those were the guys making their offense go, not the guys at the top. But maybe that's a problem further down the road, not necessarily this upcoming year. At tight end, Gronk came back and he was fine. He not a disaster. He actually is still useful. He still absolutely knows what he's doing. Still a good run blocker, impressively, despite his weight loss. And yeah, they're fine with them going forward. Actually, their whole group, Cam Brate, really good. Actually, a really underrated receiver. He legitimately matters as a guy, not even just in the red zone. If they used him more down the whole field, you would be able to see some numbers put up by Cam Brate. But yeah, they're fine there between those two. O.J. Howard, let him go. Man, he's bad. I'm worried some other team's going to take a flyer on him and actually expect him to be their main primary guy. O.J. Howard, again, no hate for the guy. He's just a horrible football player, and that's unfortunate. But Bucks, I think, clearly not going to re-sign him, so not a huge deal. Anthony Auclair and Tanner Hudson, two backup guys I want to mention too. Anthony Auclair, just a blocker. Don't hate him. Don't really care, though. Not a player who matters. But Tanner Hudson, I want to mention. I want to get on record that he's shown, despite, we're talking really limited snaps, but he can do some things actually fairly similarly to Cam Brate above him in terms of meaningfully separating from NFL-level defenders. Now, again, really small sample size, but I just want to point out that name, I wouldn't be surprised if it's on this team or another team, but if he becomes someone who matters going forward. Offensive line. They're really good there. Really, really good. Donovan Smith gets underrated because he had like one bad year a couple of years ago. And again, with these guys who get paid, his contract, a lot of fans are going to look at that and say he's overpaid. Not really. As far as he's a quality tackle who doesn't get killed by almost anyone. He has a couple notable issues with guys like Khalil Mack and Cam Jordan, which can be an issue, but he's not like with some of these other tackles who get absolutely bodied by them. If he has a problem, it's with those type of guys. But I'm not super worried. And again, he's clearly good enough to win the Super Bowl with him at left tackle, right? And I do like him. Tristan Wirfs on the other side, fantastic, really, really good. One of the best run blockers in the NFL. No worries there. Literally, no complaints. Really good. As far as the guards, interior guys go, Ellie Marpet, for my money, one of the three best guards in the NFL, pretty clearly. And they're set there. I think maybe his impact even gets underrated. You saw what happened when he missed the game against the Saints early in the year, which is a big part of why I thought they were going to come back and beat the Saints in the playoffs, was the difference between him not playing and him playing. Now, part of that also, too, is how horrible his backup was. But Ellie Marpet's for real. Ryan Jensen, too, really good guy. Really, really good guy. Yeah, really good center. Not in love with him as much, but yeah, you're not going to do better than him very easily. At their other guard spot, though, more interestingly, Alex Kapp is pretty bad. He if there's a clear weak link on this offense, well, not if there is, there is one, and it's him. Now, he's not awful. There are worse guards starting across the NFL, but he does get pretty regularly borderline dominated, to be honest with you, which you don't want from interior linemen. I bet they could do a lot better. In fact, we saw in the Super Bowl and the NFC Championship, Aaron Stinnie was just straight up better than Alex Kappa has been through pretty much his whole career. Now, Aaron Stinnie wasn't great, but actually he showed enough for me to be like, I would favor him for snaps if I was the Buccaneers going forward pretty clearly, although I would suspect they're going to be loyal to Kappa, given that he's been a starter for a little bit. But Aaron Stinnie, they do have something there as far as a replacement level, non-horrible offensive lineman, which those guys are really valuable. So overall, in the offense going into the offseason, they're fine for next year. They're still going to be elite, but they really got to be careful about choosing these non-elite, higher level players over the real reason, the depth of their offense for why they're good. Not that I'm super worried they will. Actually, compared to other teams, I have more faith in them. But that's the state of their offense going to the offseason. As for the Buccaneers defense, I mean, this unit is disgustingly good. And going into the next season, all the important parts effectively are still there, and maybe even you're going to get better. So, the Buccaneers looking great next year. Position by position on the defensive line, stacked. It's incredible. This is everything that people thought that the preseason, like Broncos or Steelers, all that stuff were going to be. This team is the one with the loaded front seven, specifically on the down linemen. I mean, you're talking Vita Vea, who is an incredibly good nose tackle, who does really valuable things in all phases of the game, including pass rushing and sideline to sideline against the run. I mean, he's really incredibly athletic for his side, which, I mean, is obvious if you know anything about him, but he uses that in a way that, I mean, Vita Vea is really good, is the point. And getting hurt early in the season did hurt them for a while because his backup's not as good. Now, they are still pretty good. I'll get to them, but really important player. If he's healthy next year, man, yeah. And Ndamukong Suh, dominant run player, not a great pass rusher, especially at this point in his career, but he's actually fine there, serviceable, better than a lot of defensive tackles still. And again, as a run defender, he's borderline perfect, or as close as you're going to get as far as a three technique guy. I guess he plays DN in their scheme, but William Golston too, a really good player. I think he gets really underrated. Maybe his name's not a big deal. He doesn't put up huge sack numbers ever, but again, he consistently does things that matter and wins matchups quickly on the interior and even the edges of the defensive line. And him being hurt as well, he was more towards the middle of the season, hurt them when they did go through a little bit of a rough patch, but when he's healthy, I mean, he's every bit as good as these other guys, and really, I think he gets underrated, and he's somebody who needs more praise. Their backups, too, I mean, the trade for Steve McClendon, that was a mistake. They picked the worst of the two Jets nose tackles, being Florent Fatakasi, but he's fine. As a nose tackle, he's good enough to play that fat guy role in a way that doesn't hurt your team. Which, I mean, granted, is not necessarily difficult to find, but he certainly fits in that category. Raheem Nunez-Roches, he does a little bit more than that. He played a lot, especially when William Golston was out. Now, he's not great, and they did use him too much probably away from nose tackle. They were using him towards the end of the line of scrimmage sometimes, which there was matchups that made sense, but it was more of a personnel. They're just not a deep team. He's reasonable, for sure. I'm not going to roast him too much. You got a player there, too. Then you got Patrick O'Connor and Khalil Davis. Khalil Davis barely played, but when he did play towards the end of the year, I think there might be something there, too. Very clearly athletic, and again, he was moving in a way that mattered, especially down the line of scrimmage on these stretch zone plays that they were kind of facing in a couple games towards the end of the year. There's a chance Khalil Davis is something too, and I mean, you're just throwing stuff on the pile at that point. Patrick O'Connor, he's fine, more of a defensive end, like a true 4-3 defensive end, and he doesn't necessarily do anything that I care about, but definitely not a disaster when he's on the field, and you'll take that, of course, especially, I mean, at this point, we're talking about an 8th, right, defensive lineman, so really good. Edge rushers, really good. Jason Pierre-Paul, elite run defender at that point, and does things as a pass rusher that actually matter, especially with his hand usage, and he can win quickly against tackles in a way that a lot of tackles actually do have a vulnerability to. I do think tackles are more similar to even, like, Pokemon types than people want to admit or accept. It's not, good versus bad. It's just how this tackle operates versus how they don't. Whereas, some tackles are really vulnerable versus guys who are just straight line speed rushers, guys who are really strong, powerful guys. And a lot of times if they're weak to one, they're not going to be weak to the others unless they're just really bad. And Jason Pierre-Paul has a unique one in terms of he wins with hand usage, and I mean, he has quickness and strength too, of course, but that's something that Chandler Jones does, and that's why Chandler Jones is so consistently good too. Shaquille Barrett, though, one of the best straight line speed rushers. Now, is he an elite guy? No. We did see sacks come a lot down this year. His pressure rate stayed similar, and that makes sense because, like I said, I do think he's still really good, and I believe they are bringing him back. They used the franchise tag in Chris Godwin instead of Shaquille Barrett or a guy we're going to get to later, which I would generally disagree with, but I think it's going to end up working out. They're going to bring everybody back, so whatever. But yeah, if they bring those guys back, I mean, you're still talking about a literally dominant front seven. Backups too. I want to talk about Anthony Nelson. He is really good. Not an elite player, but when I talk about these backups in this manner, I'm rarely talking at that level. But I mean, you're talking about a player who matters in Anthony Nelson. I'm very, very sure about that. He consistently makes plays when he's on the field, including as a pass rusher and as a hybrid outside linebacker in his first year of any relevancy. That really matters. Really stood out to me. At actual linebacker, really only two guys that matter: Levante David and Devin White. Levante David, don't want to talk about him too much. He's elite. Really, really, really good. Rarely makes, if ever, makes mistakes, including both phases of the game. He's just really good. Devin White, though, I know he still had like a really bad PFF grade, but he was pretty good. He wasn't great, and he does have issues, actually fairly similar to a lot of these other LSU linebackers and Deion Jones and Patrick Queen, those types of guys, in terms of just really over pursuing plays because he's just kind of too athletic. But he doesn't really do it that badly, and especially as a pass defender, he's capable of doing some nutty things, really similar to Deion Jones as well, that are actually meaningfully valuable as opposed to, breaking on a running back who was going to get tackled for a 2-yard loss or for a 2-yard gain instead of making it a 2-yard loss, where in the grand scheme of things that actually is not important. But with him being able to break up passes like 6-7 yards away from his natural position in zone coverage in the middle of the field, which he does with some level of frequency, that's not something many guys do. That's something that only Deion Jones, Fred Warner, Bobby Wagner guys that really mattered to. So I like Devin White a lot, for sure. But he does still have issues as far as run defense goes, and I do think if he's playing on a worse team, you would see his flaws stand out a whole lot more. But luckily, he's on one of the most loaded rosters in the NFL. Secondary, really, really good. You got their corners who are, an elite unit, one of the top 3-5 in the NFL, no question. Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, and Sean Murphy-Bunting are all really good. And what's interesting about them is they're all really good in unique ways, similar to what I was talking about with the tackles and how they're vulnerable or good against certain things. Receivers and corners operate in a fairly similar fashion to that too, although lines get a lot more blurred in that instance. But Jamel Dean, a huge guy who can run with anybody. Carlton Davis, a still huge guy who also wins with technique and press guys out of plays and isn't a disaster laterally. And Sean Murphy-Bunting, who I think might be the best of the three and gets underrated because he plays the slot for them, is really, really good. And he, rarely, if ever, gets burned. And he legitimately limits guys' ability to create space, even guys who matter. Even in division, he would play Emmanuel Sanders close. He played guys who were really good in a meaningfully good way. So they're set there. Not a lot of depth. They had Ross Cockrell playing when they had some injuries later in the year, which actually not awful. I don't hate Ross Cockrell. I think he's all right. But if those three guys are healthy, really hard to do better than that. Though they do still have, because their outside corners are such big monsters, they do still have a little bit of an issue keeping up with smaller guys who are going to beat them with lateral ability, like Devontae Adams in the NFC Championship game, although his stat line looked a little worse because of the overall Buccaneers defense. But I think like a Tyreek Hill too. Yeah, you guys remember that one. But yeah, I don't want to talk about it too much more. But the safeties, there I do want to fight back though. This is the weakest spot on this team for sure. Outside of Alex Kappa, Jordan Whitehead, I actually like. I think he's a really valuable. Hold back on that. He's a pretty valuable run defender at safety, and he can make some plays, especially going downhill, even better than a lot of guys around the NFL that maybe have a better reputation than them. But he is still weak in coverage. Not great. And Mike Edwards, backup, actually really borderline identical player, just without the flashing plays going downhill and run support. Antoine Winfield, though. People got to chill with this Antoine Winfield stuff. I don't hate him. I think he's going to be really good probably for most of his career. But as of right now, listen, you had a team in the Buccaneers, right? When the first 4 weeks of the season, we're talking about them playing the Panthers, we're talking about the Saints, and a couple other teams who effectively refused to push the ball past 5 yards down the field. And when you have a rookie free safety who's not getting challenged, well, What does it look like? It looks like he's not getting beat. That was not the case. He definitely is exploitable as a deep safety. I mean, he's not a disaster. Let's chill with that. I think he fits closer to like a Trey Boston at this point than a Marcus Williams. A lot closer. I mean, he's not even as good as Trey Boston, but as far as the hierarchy of true center field free safeties go. Now, Antoine Winfield does do more than that. He is a really hard-nosed run defender who plays conceptually, plays the run all right, but people do got to chill with him just as like an elite guy. He's nowhere near these other like Jamal Adams types as of yet. Is it possible? I suppose. I don't necessarily see it, but you're fine, is the point. With this loaded defense going to the offseason, man, if they bring everybody back, they're going to be really, really good again. This was not a fluke, even a little bit. So Buccaneers in a great spot, and this is probably one of the teams I'm least worried about going from the top to anywhere else in recent memory, to be honest.